So, I spent last weekend with you and my sister-in-law. We came out and spent a day with you, and a couple things that I took away from that was your distinction between central and peripheral conditioning. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is that, say, the difference between myself and Gwen is that she's NASCAR and I'm an Accord, but that's the central conditioning.
Yeah.
One difference. There are probably other differences as well. But one thing that we may have in common is that the peripheral conditioning, the neuromuscular control, all of those form-based focuses and the drill-based focuses, those are the things that would be really important for everybody to focus on, and then allow the engine to sort of catch up to what their skills will allow. Is that a good summary?
I think that is a good summary. I think also we in endurance triathlon we have a conundrum. The people that have smaller engines are out there longer and put their mechanics under stress for longer. They need higher levels of muscle endurance. They need higher levels of good mechanics because they're not going to take 3 hours to run the marathon off the bike. They're not going to take 31 or 32 minutes like Gwen does to run a 10K off the bike, or 112 or 113 like Kevin does off the bike. They're going to be out there for 2+ hours in a 70.3, and they're going to be out there for 50 to 60 minutes plus in a 10K off the bike. And so they actually have to pay attention to these peripheral drills almost more than the pros do. They have longer contact times, their feet are on the ground for longer periods of time, they bend their knees more, their hips swivel more, and so they're putting themselves under a lot more pressure, and they would actually do well to try and build their chassis of their Honda Accord up to a point where it can actually handle that V6 or that four-cylinder motor that they do have.
Great. And this is one of the reasons why I take every opportunity I can to attend your clinics or attend your seminars, or if you're going to be teaching nearby, I make a point to put on my calendar. I learn so much from you every time we talk. You've mentioned several things so far about different specific run mechanics. You talked about the movement forward and backward versus up and down and round in circles. You talked about Gwen's extension. You talked about Rinny's stride length. You talked about Kevin's hip drop and how you corrected it. There's so many different elements that it can seem overwhelming for someone. In the Run Transformation course, you have all these things sort of, I don't know if compartmentalized is the right word, but you've got everything organized in a nice way so that people can learn about their own bodies, correct?
Absolutely. And you saw when I worked with you guys 2 weekends ago that the way you go about this is not to teach people a system, but to teach people to understand how they do move. And that's where it will be very useful because they'll get a sense. I start off the presentation on mechanics. I start off with what it should look like and why it looks like that, and then I just break it down piece by piece. So I don't want people to look at their running and say, I need to retool my entire run form, because that's not really possible, but to look at where do they fall way outside of the markers and how would they get themselves back in those markers, and distinguishing, and I help them distinguish there. Is it a range of motion deficit? Is it a functional movement deficit? Is it a skill deficit? Is it a muscle imbalance? Is it a lack of strength to be able to do that? So some people can do these various skills. Some people could be midfoot runners, but they're not strong enough to do so, or they don't have the skills to do that. So absolutely, if people took that piece by piece, it's like any kind of background information, and they soak themselves in that, but they look at it very specifically from their point of view. What do I do with my arms? How is my head position? How do I function with my shoulders? How much do I bend my knee? How connected am I when I transition? There's all sorts of, I saw that there's just been a sports watch being brought out that actually tells people what their contact time is, which is something that, took a lot of equipment before that. Now we have a accelerometer that can do that on your wrist, and it also tells people how much they vertically oscillate. So that information is starting to become more and more available to the general public, and then if you know what you're doing just in terms of yourself, you don't have to go and work on all of these things. You say, okay, I've gone through this whole thing. Obviously my two problem areas are A and B, and then they go out and specifically work on those.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's fantastic. I think if I just wrote down an outline of what you just talked about for the last 3 to 4 minutes, I could study that for a couple years and continue learning a lot about running.